And the bags.
Hi, welcome to A Lesson Before Writing, episode 18. I'm Ted Morrissey, and I'm here with my co-hosts, Brady Harrison. This is Brady's book, The Term Between, winner of the High Plains Book Award. Also here with Grant Tracey, author of the Hayden Fuller Mystery Series, and this is Neon Kiss, which came out last year. And I'll just go ahead and plug my most recent book, The Strophes of Job, and out in, like all our books, in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle editions. And exciting news, though, is that we are super close to having both of these guys' new books out into the world. In fact, last night I uploaded Grant's files to the printer for A Shoeshine Kill, the new Hayden Fuller mystery. And so we're generating a proof, which hopefully will arrive in the not too distant future. And so I'm hoping for like a January 15th release. And then Brady, I sent back your maybe last corrections on A Journey to Al Ramel. And we'll see. We haven't quite finished your cover yet. The cover, the dimensions of it have to be precise to the number of pages. And so I usually wait until we have the inside for sure done rather than do the cover and then discover later, oh, the pagination is not quite right. Not that it would be a huge deal, but it's just, might as well wait until we got the inside done. And it seems like every time, Brady, we work on your book, the pagination does shift a little bit. So it's such a complex book, typographically speaking. But anyway, I'm excited to get those books out into the world. Grant, I presume you're feeling pretty good about getting A Shoeshine Kill to the printer. You had a bunch of corrections, that you found, some things you wanted to change. What was that that process like as we were just inching towards the finish line for folks out there who maybe, haven't gone through that process completely? How do you feel about that whole business?
Oh, it was great. And, I don't know if you ever had this happen, Brady, but every once in a while, I come up with a name and it's a little too close to somebody I know. And I totally forgot about this young lady, 7th grade, 8th grade, who was part of my junior high. I wouldn't say posse, but we were all in vocal together. They divided there was band, orchestra, and vocal, and I wanted to hang out with my buddies, so I did vocal. I got a terrible voice for singing, but anyway, I'm like, oh my God, I got to change this name. So at the last minute, I'm like panicking. I called Ted on the phone and said, before this goes to press, and he's like, yeah, I understand. No problem. So that was the last change we made. I changed the name. So it's not based on her in any way, but obviously that name stuck in the back of my head, and yeah, I'm glad I caught it. Because even though
seeing the cover, Grant, it looks pretty great. I mean, it really captures that era.
Yeah.
So I was really happy when Ted shared it around.
Oh man, I love the cover, and I said to Ted what I loved about it, because you and me both, we experienced the 72, and I was like in 7th grade when it happened. And
Hey, Grant, not to interrupt, but could you give a little background for anyone who doesn't know what the heck we're talking about?
I'm sorry. Yeah, the 72 Summit Series was Canada versus the Soviet Union, and an 8-game hockey series. And the first 4 games are in Canada, Montreal, Toronto, Winnipeg, and Vancouver. And then the next 4 games, there was about a 2-week break, and Canada played the Swedes in that time. And then we played in Moscow. And all those games, three of those games were played while I was in school. One of them was on the weekend. So we actually were marshaled to the gym or the library to watch the games. And it was all about Canadian identity, because we knew as Canadians, we were the best hockey players in the world. But because the way the Olympics is set up, Canadian athletes, our best players weren't able to play because they were seen as professionals, which they were. But the Ruskies were seen as amateurs, which was nonsense because they were on the government dole, and they were making a good living in the Soviet Union, and not like Canadian hockey players, but a pretty good living. And they were considered amateurs, and they kept winning all these gold medals. And so we're like, we're going to show them. And Alan Eagleson, who's a criminal, but we'll talk about that some other time. He helped arrange this Summit Series, and we thought we were going to kick their ass. We were drinking the Canadian Hockey Dynasty Kool-Aid, and for game one in Montreal, they kicked our ass like 7-2, 7-3, and it changed everything. And it questioned Canadian identity. It changed the landscape of hockey. The Winnipeg Jets, actually, the WHA Winnipeg Jets, marshaled in the Russian style of playing, and then the Edmonton Oilers took off with it. And it's, the speed of the game now, if you're a hockey fan like Brady and I are, we owe it to the Russians. It's their style of play, instead of just dump and chase the puck and forecheck and cycle. That's still all part of the game. It was like, if I don't like, watch overtime, you'll see it. I don't like what I see, I turn back with the puck and then come rushing up the ice again. And what's happening right now in the NHL, shots on goal are going down, but people are taking more quality shots the way the Ruskies used to play in the 70s and 80s. You don't need 40 shots a game. I can take 20, but if 5 are quality, I'm going to score on three or four of them. So anyway, changed the landscape of the game. But for Canadians, we felt like, who are we? And so I love the cover because it just has a Russian hockey player on the cover. There's no Canadian identity is absent from the cover. And so that's the way it felt to me. And I just remember liking the way the Soviets played. I wasn't rooting for them, but I admired them. And then I felt like kind of like a traitor a little bit because I'm a fine Canadian boy and I'm rooting for my Canadians. And but I kind of like the Soviet brand of hockey. So it's very complicated feelings. So anyway, that's a long story, but that's the backdrop for the novel.
Well, I want to get Brady's reaction, but this just in from 12 Winters legal department. Grant apologizes for any accusations of criminality that he may have had made recently. So please no lawsuits from the estate of whoever the hell he's talking about.
No, they took his plaque down from the Hockey Hall of Fame. He served jail time. So I'm okay mentioning Mr. Alan Eagleson as well. He went to jail and his plaque is removed from the Hockey Hall of Fame. So we have no worries there.
All right. I'll let head of legal know that. Brady, do you have any thoughts on any of that business?
Yes, of course. We're talking about the formative experience, and what Grant and I have had this conversation many times, and Ted won't let us talk about hockey, but he has authorized us indirectly today. So it's Ted's fault.
Fair game.
But John Ferguson sent Bobby Clark out on the ice to save Canada.
Yes.
In a way.
Yes.
Right. And he did a malicious, vicious attack on the best Russian player. However, it worked.
And that was one of the things I discovered rewatching, because I rewatched those first four games over and over again to write the book, and I took extensive notes. And I've read a ton of books on the Summit Series, but we won in Toronto 4-1 to kind of get back in the series after losing the first game in Montreal. But people forget Valery Karlamov took a 10-minute misconduct for bumping an official. He was really hounded in that game. And it changed the course of the game because he wasn't on the ice. And so our victory, although on the surface looked like, wow, we did it. Peter Mahovlich scored a goal that is the greatest goal he ever scored in his life. Tony Esposito made so many great saves in that game. We easily could have lost game 2, but yeah.
So anyway, the question was getting the book down to the finish line and making those final edits. So
yes, sir.
When I asked for background information, I should have known better.
I'm sorry.
But all I was expecting was, it's a Hayden Fuller novel set against the backdrop of the 1972 Summit Series. That's really all I was looking for. But anyway, so as you were making these final edits, because you've said in the past you're not necessarily the best proofreader of your own work, but yeah, you were pretty fine-toothing it. You were finding some pretty good gets there down the stretch.
Yeah, I was. I don't know. I did read it. I mean, in the last few days, I think I've reread it 3 times. So yeah, I was pleased with my catches. But I think you've also, Ted, done such a good job getting it cleaned up that it's it was really close when I was looking at the final, the final copies. So yeah, it was. I know I caught a few things, but that's good, right? I mean, that's what the editor should do. But yeah, usually I can't see my own stuff, but I don't know. This is my favorite novel out of all the ones I've written. So hopefully
Well,
that.
my thing as the book designer layout guy, my brain is thinking about other kinds of things besides, just the text on the page. And so I always order a physical proof. We could just do it electronically. The printer will upload basically a PDF, of the book in a few days, and could just look at that, go through and say, yeah, it looks good. But I've just found, over the years that I can't proofread nearly as well on the screen. I don't think anyone can.
Yeah.
So once that physical proof comes in, I'll go through it. My wife will go through it. I'll mail the copy to you, and Cedars Falls let you take a look at, and I'll bet you there's still. My rule of thumb is if there's one typo hiding in the manuscript, that means there's at least two. So anyway, but it's a little more expensive, but I feel getting it just right is super important. So I'm happy to spend that little extra time and money. But no, I appreciate your close reading, and we'll give it a few more close readings once the physical book arrives.
Sure.
But Brady, you've been also just poring over your manuscript again and again and again. Now, the problem for anyone who hasn't been following the saga of Brady's book via our podcast, it's highly experimental, especially typographically, I mean, on the page. And so the first go was kind of a disaster because it was just literally impossible to make it work. And so we basically kind of had to go back to scratch and simplify the text. And so it's been through several iterations, but a lot of the errors have been sort of remnants of earlier iterations of the manuscript, which we didn't have with Grant's because it was more straightforward from the beginning. But anyway, Brady, how would you describe the process thus far? We're not quite there to the point where we are with Grant's book, but we're pretty darn close.
Yeah, no. The word that comes to mind in all of this at this moment is elation, because I mean it's. I wrote the book that I wanted to write, and it fit on the screen. It fit in Word, but that's not the same as publishing. And so I have learned a great many things, particularly that Ted is a very patient person who's we've been working on this manuscript. I mean, the book itself, the story has been largely done. I mean, there've been, some word changes, just sharpening a little image or a little bit of language here and there, pretty straightforward changes. But the graphicness of it, the staging of it has, and I think old software leaves kinds of ghosts. And so things, mysteriously parts of text were over top of other parts of text. And then, so it was a real, it was a great deal of work for Ted, but I think I was looking at the changes you sent me, and I'll go over them again once we're done the podcast. But I think we're there, except for the proofing for the typos. Yeah, who knows? So anyway, yeah. So elation, and it's so much fun and it's so much work at the same time. Yeah. Why? I've learned. Next time out, a little bit more straightforward, Ted. So going on the record.
Well, Joyce said that after he finished Finnegan's Wake, which took him 17 years, that the next book was going to be short and simple. So even Joyce wore himself out with the modernist approach or whatever. But no, it's a great book, and I'm super looking forward to having it out in the world. And yeah, it was a challenge, or has been a challenge in terms of layout. But but I've learned a lot of stuff too. I mean, that's always, a couple of years ago, maybe more than a couple of years ago, I published that dual language edition of poetry by 12 Chinese poets, and a facing page with Mandarin on one page and the English translation on the next, and they were supposed to line up exactly. And that was also quite challenging, but I'm very, very proud of that book, just as I'm proud of your guys' books as well. So So that's great. So anyway, hopefully in January when we get back together, we'll actually have some physical books to show on video at least, and we'll be out in the world, if not knocking on the door of being out in the world at that point. So that's terrific.
Brady, we should
Go ahead, Grant.
I was just saying, Brady and me, a couple of Canadian homeboys, we should tour or something when the weather gets nicer. I
agree. Yeah, I agree.
On the Narrative Boys from 12 Winters. I think it could be kind of cool. I'm just thinking, thinking out loud.
No, I agree. No, we absolutely need to take our show on the road. So yeah, we need to strategize. We talked before, had been in eavesdropping and had been told about conversations, and I think I mentioned this to you guys, or I had mentioned it to you, that people who are in the business of selling their work, some publicists were saying that 90% of your time is promotion and only 10% of the time is creation. That seems wrong to me in so many fundamental ways. Nonetheless, I think the taking the show on the road is part of what needs to be done. So anyway, and it's always fun to get together. So
yeah, it'd be awesome, man. Just a thought bubble.
I have a book of somebody gave it to me, pithy quotes from authors throughout the centuries or something. And unfortunately, I forget the author's name, but the quote is something like, "The only thing worse than your publisher asking you to go on a book tour is your publisher not asking you to go on a book tour." Yeah. So, okay, go good. Yeah, we'll make some plans, or I'll encourage you guys to make some plans, or whatever the right word is for that. So, my uncle was a newspaper guy. He was an editor, and he wrote a weekly column for literally decades. And of course, he always tried to get everything right, but occasionally the misinformation would slip through the cracks. And he said, well, the silver lining of that is that he always had the subject for his next column. Then correcting the one he had just written. And so I'm feeling that way a little bit, because in our last podcast episode, one of the things we talked about was writing every day versus not writing every day. And I said that for 30 some years now, I write Monday through Friday every morning pretty religiously. Grant says he writes for a number of weeks at a time and then takes some time off. And it's not a competition, but clearly my grad students thought it was, and damn it, Grant, you won. They all agree that your approach was a much saner, more realistic approach or whatever. So that got me thinking, and my grad students, they're working on their thesis, so they were in the final stages of finishing their degree, and so we had some back and forth about that, and I realized, and this sounds like I'm trying to save face or something, but I realize it's probably something of a misnomer to say that I write every morning, Monday through Friday, because it makes it sound like every morning I'm composing new text. And probably a more accurate way of saying it is every morning, Monday through Friday, I'm engaged in the writing process, focused on whatever my main project is. So most mornings, it is actually putting pen to paper and writing. But, once I get a manuscript pretty well done, then a lot of the focus turns to revision. And I am I work on every sentence, just, labor away. I'll rewrite sentences and paragraphs again and again. So that's a little bit different. So days and weeks might be spent in revision. I might get to a point in a manuscript where I need to do some research before I can really advance it any further. So maybe for a couple of days, my writing time, quote unquote, is actually researching to integrate that into the manuscript. So my point here is that, I probably made it sound like every morning I was composing new text, X number of words or whatever. And most mornings I am, but a lot of mornings the work is not necessarily composing new text. And I think that would get to the point where you'd probably be exhausted in no time. So anyway, that's my qualification on all that. So I don't know, let me turn it over to Brady. Does that describe your process a little more accurately than saying, like I had kind of implied initially, that I wrote every day?
I have been thinking about this and thinking about Grant's model too, and I'm absolutely said this in previous podcasts, but I'm a grinder. Like I proceed very slowly, and I revise as I go. And if I'm not happy with something, set it aside, might set it completely aside and start the same story again or the same article. I find I wish it were the case that I would like to be the case that I would work 5 days a week in the mornings, but life intrudes. Prep intrudes, have administrative responsibilities at work, committee reports, meetings. So it's really one of the I think the great themes of the writing life is how do you find the time? And so the ability, one of the things I've concluded, Ted, about your approach is I've never been wholly successful at that. And I admire the way that you have all these years carved out that time. I think that's a real commitment. And I haven't been able to achieve it. And so I get breaks from writing, whether I want them or not, because of the pesky day job. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. And I was really thinking about, there was something you said, and I'm not a Freudian. Psychoanalysis is my least favorite school of theory, but and maybe Marxism. But anyway, that whole thing is it's subconscious, unconscious, whatever it is. That's what I'm trying to. Where you said you need to do that, Ted, because it gets the mind going. Where you get into flow, and you start, choices are happening because you're not, like, you're on mindless functional. It's like it's a zone. It's like, and by doing that, it sharpens that surprise effect of the world being channeled. And I was like, yeah, and but I think for me that happens all the time when I'm writing. To me, writing is the most freeing experience I have in my life. I wish I could be more the way I am when I write, because I'm so not self-conscious. I'm so not worried about saying the wrong thing or how do I appear, and or all that sort of garbage, that gets in the way, all that white noise. So I liked what you said about that, though. It forces the writing, and then it forces more of that freedom, which I think is what makes writing magical. Because I'm a big proponent of not over determining what you write. And if you kind of know where you're going, what's the point of telling the story? Because there's really nothing, you're not learning anything. So anyway, I just been thinking about that for a month now, ever since our last podcast, what you were saying about reaching those depths of feeling, I guess, experience.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't. We don't need to revisit that in any great depth. But one of the things that all kind of came out of this lecture I had done for some students and colleagues in Islamabad, remotely. And one of the things I talk about is that if I do hit a stretch where I'm not writing, I'm not one to write on vacation, for example. So when I travel, that's all about having my antenna fully, spread out and absorbing wherever I'm at, doing some reading, etc. I do know writers who will write even while they're traveling. They'll carve out time to do that. I've never done that. Or if I've been, ill or had some sort of surgery or something, I had eye surgery a few years ago, so I went several weeks without really being able to write. So I couldn't see, basically. But anyway, if I do go a few days, I realize I start to get kind of antsy, and I get it's hard to concentrate. And a lot of the symptoms I experience are the same symptoms that someone who is going through sleep deprivation, experiences. And Freud, since you mentioned psychoanalysis, he compared creative writing to dreaming during the day. That when people are doing creative writing, they're essentially letting their mind kind of wander in a way that is very dreamlike. And so I wonder if part of my what's going on there is when I write, that's helping me to sort of make sense of the world and do all the things that dreaming does for us, which of course we don't fully understand anyway. And if I'm not writing for a few days, I start to go through a sort of sleep deprivation kind of thing, and have very similar kind of responses to that. You're kind of nodding, Grant. Does that make some sense to you?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And for me, it's, yeah, I was talking to my daughter about this. It's I don't know if it's tied into anxiety in any way, but if I'm not writing or don't have an idea or don't have anything in the pipeline, I get really, it's like I got to be constantly producing because I think that's the way I find fulfillment in who I am, I guess, if that makes sense. But for me, every day I'm writing in a sense because here we are having this conversation, and then I'll think about like, oh, maybe I'll describe someone with a shirt that's open and there's a t-shirt underneath it, like you got on, Ted, like, yeah. Yeah, I just say, like, to me it's like every moment my wife will even tease, like, oh, Grant's going to put that in a story. Someone will say something or give me an anecdote and I'll file it away. And so I just want to be like those romantic poets, open to experience, and that can be channeled into writing. So I watched an Italian giallo. I love giallos. I love those Italian films of the 60s and 70s, the horror films. They're fantastic. And there was a plot idea in one of them, and I'm like, I like that, and I've used that for a short story, just a little wrinkle in the plot with involving blanks and bullets. And so for me, every time I'm watching a movie, that could be fodder for work. Every time I'm reading, there's a sentence or a way a paragraph's worked out, or how someone slips into a flashback. I'm like, ooh, that's a technique I can use. So I'm always living the writer life, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Brady, your thoughts on any of that?
Well, yeah, listening, fascinating. Grant maybe won't appreciate this, but I think Freud is a really great writer. I think he's a really good reader of books. A lot of his theories are based on his reading of fiction or,
Yeah.
fairy tales,
I do like his
folk
theory.
tales.
I do like his theory on the uncanny. I will
Oh
say
yeah.
that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. No, so for me, the analogy, and I agree with that sense of lostness or immersion in the writing process. When it's going well, like the world disappears,
Yes.
right? Like the cat's downstairs yelling because the dish is empty, and the garbage truck's working out front, or it doesn't, none of that stuff exists, right? It is a kind of altered state of consciousness. And Ted has heard me talk about this before, so I apologize. But the closest or the other experience of this that I have is when I'm out walking. I'm kind of obsessed with hiking, and so get out in the mountains. And I had this experience the other day. There had been snow, and I was on the trail, and and when you're outside, you shouldn't really lose track of your environment. It's not perfectly safe not to be, have some sense of where, but I totally lose track of what I'm doing. And then I'll find myself, a half mile down the trail. And the reason I come back into the present, into the moment, is I'm on some steep pitch and it's icy. And I'm realizing I need to pay attention here, but I think I get a lot of my best ideas are kind of daydreaming ideas for stories, but also ideas for articles or essays, whatever, in that process of walking. Like there's something so invigorating about fresh air and solitude and the wind in the trees, and maybe a lot of hikes are alongside the creek. Like it's just rejuvenating and sort of losing track of all the all the things that weigh on us the rest of the day. And I think that lets ideas come to the surface, or allows you to dive into them. Yeah, so I look forward to that, getting out for so many different reasons, including that freedom of thought.
Well, I'll have another quote here that I can't fully attribute. I think I know the attribution, but since I'm not sure, I'm not going to say. But by a female novelist, and she said something in interviews to the effect that her kids, when they were little, they could tell that she was getting close to finishing a manuscript because the dinners got progressively worse every night. So, yeah.
Somebody told me, my daughter told me a story when she was at Regis getting her MFA, and I think I've got it right. It was a partner. It wasn't my daughter, but her teacher shared a story involving her partner in which she was coming near the end of a story, and they'd gone out shopping or something, and then she suddenly was in that zone of I've got it. I gotta know where I'm going with. I got to sit down right. And then she asked the partner to stay in the car for 45 minutes while she went into the house and finished the story because she wanted no disturb. And I thought that is a writer. That's awesome. So anyway.
Well, I'm kind of like you, I think, Grant, in the sense that when proofs arrive in my inbox, it suddenly is like the most important thing in the world to get the, no offense, Brady, I don't get the same level of, but anyway, actually, I think I said this to Jeremy Schraffenberger, your colleague and a 12 Winters author, but I think it was in maybe one of those past perfect columns I used to do for you guys in the old version of the North American Review. But anyway, I told him that it would be a worst case scenario if proofs arrived in my inbox at the same moment that my house caught on fire, because I'd probably sit there before calling 911 and go through obviously probably not. But anyway, I do have that level of when they arrive, it's like, okay, I'm going to drop everything and I'm going to go through these proofs with a fine tooth comb. So
that's what happened to me. I was in the middle of grading and I'm like, I'm ahead of the grade curve. I'm getting it done. And then it's like the proofs just, it's like it's tantalizing. And I just, the grading was put on hold, so anyway.
Well, nowadays we can obviously word process and the text comes out looking pretty good, pretty spiffy. But there's something about seeing it in the actual way it's going to appear in the book or in the journal or whatever it is, that just has an allure to it. I think it was, I want to say it was Toni Morrison, who said that one of the things she loved about word processing, desktop publishing, when it came on the scene, and she'd been writing obviously for a long time before that happened, was that when she was working on a novel, she would at some point begin to print it out in the same format that it would probably appear in a printed book. And that gave her a whole different sense of the text. And so that was a whole nother phase of editing. So she would work on the novel to a certain point, and then she felt like she had to start printing it out in the textual format it was going to appear in the book. And then that moved her brain in some other place. And anyway, I thought that was always really fascinating. And I think I kind of understand that. I haven't done that exactly, but getting that proof and seeing it how it's going to actually appear in the journal is a really neat, milestone, and it kind of triggers my desire to go through it again. And even though maybe I've been through the text in a bazillion ways, I don't know, Brady, what about you? Do you have a particular, unique reaction to a proof versus just seeing manuscript on a typewritten page or something?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's that old saw that you better write something that you like, or you better like what you write, because you're going to look at it more often than any human should look at anything in such, fine detail. So speaking before about elation, it's part of that feeling of elation, like there it is. Right. It has weight. It's about to become real. So that's always and as you know, how things look on the page matters a great deal to me, and the kinds of things that one might do to create effects on the page. So I'm always, that's always a good day. I wouldn't stop grading though, because that when you get the grading done, then you can think again. But like that sort of weight, that gorilla on your back. Yeah, I'd really admire that, Grant. Like you have some fortitude.
All right. Well, looking at the clock here, viewers and followers of our podcast know we have a featured story every episode, and not to disappoint, we have another one this episode. The mail system messed us up a little bit, and Brady didn't get the hard copy I mailed him, so I ran out at 10:30 last night my time and did another scan and sent him. But he had has read it, and so I think we're probably ready to jump into our featured story if you guys are ready. This comes from a really well-known and prestigious journal, Bennington Review. They got a great creative writing MFA program at Bennington, and this is their book. And this is a whopper of an issue. I don't know, maybe video folks, you can see It's a cast of thousands. It looks like the character list of a Russian novel on the back of their book. But it's a great issue, and I was really hard pressed to find a story to send you guys because there were so many great stories, And so anyway, I did end up with a story titled "Wild and Strong and Completely Fearless" by Sally DeWind, DeWind. It might be DeWind. Apologize to Sally if I'm not pronouncing that quite right. But it's a pretty traditionally written story. Again, followers of our podcast know that Brady and I tend to lean towards the experimental, and Grant a little more traditional. And when I was weighing what to send you guys, I thought, well, I think Grant will. This is more his cup of tea. In fact, it kind of reminds me of a Bernard Malamud story a little bit, and maybe Grant can weigh in on that when I stop talking here in just a second. But I'm going to read just from the very beginning of the story. And in fact, one of the things that's kind of old-fashioned about it is that it has really long paragraphs. Again, this is for video folk, but nowadays writers, and I feel this way, I tend to be more inclined to shorter paragraphs just for the visual, just get more white space in there. But heck, you read an older a Henry James story or something, and a single paragraph will go on for pages and pages and pages. And I just finished, after many months, Roberto Bolaño's novel The Savage Detectives, and it was wonderful. But one of the things that was so that slowed me down, I read it very carefully, but there were paragraphs that went on for pages and not a single bit of white space for pages. But anyway, this begins with a long paragraph, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll read just from the beginning, and then we'll kind of jump in here. I'm anxious to see what you guys have to think about Wild and Strong and Completely Fearless. It is the night of parent-teacher conferences. I sit at the desk in my classroom and savor the short lull between parents, a moment to shake the eraser crumbs from my skirt, to stare into space. So far, the conferences have felt smoother than last year's, when I stumbled over all my words and felt so exhausted afterwards that I fell asleep on the subway and missed my stop. Now I know what to expect. Parents are often harried by sympathetic, parents are often harried but sympathetic, eager to lay down the law if you want, asking what more they can do. They might let out a sigh of relief at some praise or give a quick grin to spite themselves. When I first started at this high school a year and a half ago, a brand new English teacher, other teachers had warned me that I might find some parents at this school, quote unquote, intense, shorthand for the group that was rich and white, the kinds who might ask why they found no fewer than 3 comma splices in their daughter's essay that seemed to have gone unnoticed by you, her teacher. Right, I'm gonna stop there. So this is a very kind of self-contained short story, temporally speaking. It takes place over the course of maybe about an hour or so, maybe not even that long. There are flashbacks, here and there, so it's sort of fleshed out in that regard. But in essence, this parent comes in and starts talking about her son, just assuming this young teacher knows who she is and what student they're talking about. But much of the story goes on without the young teacher realizing exactly who she's talking about. And then when she does, she starts thinking about, he is a troubled young man and he has been a disruption in the class, but she's reluctant to be that straightforward with this mom, who clearly is troubled and struggling with issues with her son, both she and her husband and his father. Anyway, there's a lot of stuff happening in this story, and a lot of it is sort of psychological. It's kind of going on within the mindset of the monologue of the main character, the young teacher. But I'll stop there and see what you guys have to think. And maybe, since I kind of referenced you already, Grant, and saying the story reminded me of sort of a Bernard Malamud story. What are your thoughts about that, or anything else?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I love that first paragraph, or at least half of the first paragraph that you read for us, Ted. because that there's that little teaser that tells you that we're going to move from stasis into chaos, which is she knew more what to expect this time around. And it's like, no, I know fiction, and and in the world of fiction, your expectations, to quote the great TV show 24, expect the unexpected. So that so I always have to bring it back to genre, don't I? But yeah, so I knew that little teaser things were going to be what they seemed. So I love that. And I think the story, you're absolutely right. It's very traditional, takes place in about an hour. We do there's lots of like a Malamud story, a lot of mindscape, a lot of interior, a lot of she so many of the examples of what she thinks about really layer the story in a great way. The swastika, for example, is one that I can't get out of my head. In terms of just this troubled young man. So yeah, I found it, and I like the flashbacks within. So it's like she's got like a series of flashbacks, and then the mom is telling stories which function in a way to play with time and about the train hopping and all that stuff. That's pretty. It's pretty cool. It's there's just a lot to admire about, and it resonated with me because I'm a flaw in my character. Besides, sometimes I find myself way too amusing. I'm always all day long. I'm laughing at things I do. I think I'm a regular riot. A flaw in my character is I don't always push back when I need to, and I always want to make nice in the sandbox with people, and I appreciated seeing a character who reminded me of myself, who is presented with a problem and doesn't know really how to extricate oneself from that problem. And she gets basically played in some ways. It's like the woman that comes in to talk to her does the secret handshake, and they talk about schools and stuff, blah blah blah. And the next thing you know, she's getting roped into being asked to, write a letter of recommendation. And in all my years of teaching, I have been honest with students. I mean, I've said, look, I can't write you a glowing letter. I can write you a good letter, but I mean, you sure you want me to write you the letter? And but that took me years to get there. I used to just say yes, and now I'm like, I know you worked really hard, but I'd be glad to write you a letter. But are you sure I can write the? Yeah, yes, Dr. Tracey. And I said, okay, you got it. I'll do the best I can. But that took me years to get to that point. So yeah, I appreciated the sensibilities of the young teacher, just fresh out of wherever she got her background and whatever teaching college she went to. So I thought that was pretty accurate as far as I'm concerned, in terms of realism.
Yeah. Brady, what are your reactions to the story?
Well, yeah, it's a quiet traditional tale. I can see that I'm getting washed out. The sun is just there. I am.
Here we go.
Yeah, there we go. Here, you talk amongst yourselves. We'll be right back.
Well, yeah, just to fill in the blanks a little bit, you mentioned the swastika, and I'll just for our listeners, there's one of the things the teacher talks about is that she had the young, all of her students do. I think he must be like a senior in high school, by the way,
Yeah.
do a PowerPoint presentation, and they could do about whatever they wanted to do. And it sounded like he did a pretty interesting PowerPoint presentation, but he incorporated like a Nazi swastika as like the visual device to fade from one scene, the PowerPoint slide to the next. And so she, was able to convince him to revise it, and he went along with it. He took out the swastika.
I think it was also like the emphasis was on panzers. I think it was like German tanks.
Yeah. It was on German tanks.
World War II.
So it's kind of appropriate for the topic.
But just
right.
Oh my God.
Okay, Brady, you're back in living color.
Well, yeah. So yeah, I apologize for that. Nobody wants to see me in living color. Better to be sun faded away. Yeah, no, it's a quiet story. There's a kind of gentle troubledness to it, although the young man is very troubled. The protagonist, the teacher, is sympathetic and trying to do a good job, and it's a very familiar scene for us, right? The parent-teacher conference and the matter of the good student that's helping in the hallway, regulate the flow of traffic and make sure the appointments go by smoothly, versus the troubled student. And so, yeah, it's thoughtful, it's elegantly written, and the two glimpses back into the young man, Aaron's previous experience, not to keep giving away too many details, but the train riding that Grant alluded to, and I won't be any more specific than that, but then his earlier passion in the arts that, the culture stomped out of him. Somehow he got the message that he shouldn't be doing that. Those are in a quiet story. I found them to be quite powerful moments, and it reminds me we have to have sympathy for those who are falling out, because we can hardly know what their experience has been, or we can know that there's this punishing world out there that's disciplining people and denying them the right to express themselves and seeking to diminish them. So I quite liked this story, and it's not the sort of story that I'm normally compelled by. I like kind of little fancier stuff, and but there's no shouting in the story. There's no shouting in the telling of it. It's not that kind of story, and I think it works really well. It has a lot of layers, including, I'm just looking at the line about the little uh, neon sign in the apartment across the way. Fuck off. So, nice details. That was a cool moment.
Yeah, and I like.
Go ahead, Grant.
Just real quick. There's some real subtle nuances to the piece. Like it's quiet, like we've all been saying, and but there's this moment in the story, and I don't feel like I'm giving too much away here, but I think it's important to share, where she just blurts out at one point to a colleague or something like, "This is the kid she think would be a shooter. This would be the Columbine kid." And then later, it just that I love when writers do echo effects, like rhymes. You like kind of a callback, and then the student that's helping her, she says, "I can't talk to you about another student," and I'm like, that's, to me, like, that's quiet, but it's a sign of change. It's a sign of maturity, because it would be so easy after this experience to just sort of slip into a moment where you're just, oh my God, I didn't know how to handle that, and or but she pumps the brakes at that moment in the story, and I was really proud of her as a protagonist for making that choice. And I think it comes from the journey she's gone on with this with the student already in the class, but also with the woman during the interview. And I thought it was subtle and very well handled.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of stuff happening of like the mom. She, on the one hand, she'd like her son to be like the super student that the young lady who's comes from an immigrant family, who she's like the super student. She's helping out on parent teacher conference. She's like the gatekeeper, and this conference was only supposed to last 8 minutes, and it just keeps going on and on and on. And so the teacher is getting pressure from her student who's out in the hallway, kind of directing traffic, because that student wants her to move on, but she can't find a way to extricate herself from this conference. But the mom is complicated, because on the one hand, she'd like her son to be a super student, getting good grades and being destined to go to some Ivy League school. She and her husband are both lawyers, so presumably they have a bunch of money, and so that's not going to be an issue if the kid could just get in somewhere. But at the same time, she admires his courage. To the thing we've kind of alluded to a couple times is he and his friends go and they climb on the top of a train, And as the train is moving, they're jumping back and forth from car to car. It's wholly, completely dangerous, and the mom who has followed them surreptitiously sees this going on and ends up calling the authorities, and they get arrested and blah, 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 blah. Again, not to give too much away, but on the one hand, she's, mortified that her son is doing this. And also she's scared to death he's going to hurt himself. But yet she's also really kind of admiring him and his courage to do this, but yet she can't find the words to tell him that, so she has kind of got this conflicted, and you think that, boy, if the parents were just more honest with their son, then maybe they wouldn't be having all the problems that they're having. And just as kind of an aside, I taught high school English, in fact, seniors for 38 years, and I figured out a really long time ago, early in my career, that of course you're going to have kids in class who are like super students, and they're totally they want to analyze a poem and they want to talk about it and blah, blah, blah. They want to come in after school and talk about literature. Then you got those kids who are completely disengaged and so forth. But I knew that every kid in class was the one kid you wanted with you under the right circumstances. So the one kid who couldn't analyze a short story or didn't want to save their soul, if you had to survive in the woods for a week, that's the kid you want. Or if your transmission dropped out of your car, that's the kid you would want. Or if you had to plan a party for 50, that's the kid that you would want helping you do that. So every kid has a talent and a strength, and it's important to realize that. And in other circumstances, you, the teacher, would be the weak link and would have to ask for help and assistance from the kid who is the ne'er-do-well, at school or whatever. And I think this story really, it doesn't quite get at it in the direct way I just described, but I think there is this sense that this kid has a courageousness that is enviable, especially for the young teacher who can't assert herself in the situation. She would like to be, as the story says, wild and strong and completely fearless, as would the mom, as would most of us, that kind of thing. So I love that sort of parallel or maybe more than parallel thing happening in the story. I don't know, Grant, you haven't talked for a while. Is that something you recognize?
Yeah, I just totally agree with both you guys about there's a way in which we talk about in literary fiction to respect your characters, right? Whereas in genre fiction, we can go more to Iago figures, right? I mean, we can have antagonists or just pure evil people. Whereas in literary fiction, we have these foils, and this kid draws something out of the teacher. As that's really important. And so what you're talking about is there's a way in which I would like to be more like that. And that's giving each character dignity, which I'm a big proponent of, especially in literary fiction, that we're all shades of gray. And there's, as you were saying, Ted, a class of so many students, there's something to value in every individual, even if this kid couldn't read a short story like this and come up with things to say. But if you were, trying to fill out your taxes, they'd, probably offer you some advice to get some more money back from the government. So, there's a lot of dignity to this story, I think.
Yeah, good. Well, so yeah, Brady.
The part of that dignity, I think, comes in the moment where the mom is rather stalking the son and a group of friends, and what she observes is that he is joyful.
Yeah,
they are having fun, and that the morose kid that you don't want in your class, right, the one that is either openly or covertly hostile towards you, right, but in their lives away from, part of the dignity of the character is that we get this glimpse of this exuberance and this sense of fun, and how much better he feels among his friends than he feels in the disciplining space of the classroom. And so it's these are all just regular lives.
yeah.
The poignancy of everyday folks.
And
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, Brady, the thing I was saying, we talked about Malamud earlier, and this is a story that deals with suffering. These people are suffering, and Malamud's stories are full of people dealing with suffering. The teachers suffering, needing to push back, stand up for herself, and maybe not even sure that she's cut out for this kind of work. The kid, like you said, at 9 years old, wanted to be a dancer or enjoyed it and found out that's being a girly man, to quote Schwarzenegger, who I can't stand. Oh, we have to talk to the legal department.
Yeah, well, when it was legal.
So he's suffering, but like Brady says, there's this joy. And the mom, like she can't get close to him, wishes she could have conversations and wishes she could heal him in some ways, and can't. So it's fascinating. And everything else, and I've mentioned this in other podcasts, and Brady knows I've mentioned this, and you too, Ted, Bakhtin and his praise for Dostoevsky. And he says the beauty of Dostoevsky's work is he never finalizes his characters around a single truth. And that's one of the richnesses of this story, is that none of these characters can be defined around one adjective or one noun. They are complex and gray and full of flaws and beauties and joy and things that we admire about human beings.
Yeah, I just you reminded me of one of the important aspects of the story is the teacher, thinks about the fact that so many people in her orbit thought that she was being kind of an underachiever to become a school teacher. She could have had the intelligence and so forth to do all these other things, but didn't have the drive or didn't have the whatever. And of course, school teacher, we have this mass exodus from the classroom right now. Teachers are just quitting right and left, and part of it is that lack of respect, that lack of understanding how difficult it is to be a school teacher, and that kind of thing. I don't want to get Brady in here for his comments, but before I forget, I'm going to read Sally DeWind's little bio for her. I want to talk too about the contributors' notes or lack thereof in Bennington Review. You had to actually scan a QR code to get the contributors' notes at their website. But this is Sally DeWind's contributors' note at her website, or at Bennington Review's website. It says she is a writer from Brooklyn, New York. She's an MFA student at Brooklyn College, where she is the recipient of the 2024 Lainoff, Linoff Prize, the Lainoff Prize. Her work can be found in the Other Almanac. And then I did a search for her online and found a little bit more fulsome biography, so I'll just go read that too. There's some overlap with what I just read. But a writer and educator from Brooklyn, New York, she has taught for over 10 years, both in the U.S. and abroad, working as an English language instructor in Shiga, Shiga, Japan, and a New York City public high school English teacher. She holds a master's degree from Columbia University Teachers College and is currently in the final semester of her MFA in fiction at Brooklyn College, where she is the recipient of a Lainoff Scholarship and a Hawthornden Scholarship. At Brooklyn College, Sally serves as an adjunct professor in the English department and the editor-in-chief of the Brooklyn Review. Her work has been published or is forthcoming in the Bennington Review and the Other Almanac, which is a kind of anthology. So she obviously was writing from real life, writing what she knew. Probably a lot of the story is drawn from either her firsthand experience or things she witnessed firsthand. And so I think that's admirable too. When I first started writing, I was trying to write what I knew. And, I wrote a few stories that got published, but in retrospect, they weren't nearly as intense as this story. So I think she did a good job of molding real life experience into a story that has some drama and some tension. I don't know, Brady, again, I haven't talked to you for a while. What are some of your thoughts about any of that?
Yeah, no, I mean, it seemed very clear to me, without knowing a single thing about Sally, that this person really knew what they were talking about. That they had clearly been in this. I would have been shocked if they had not been a teacher, if they had just imagined on the basis of they went to one of their own kids' parent-teacher conferences and saw it from the other side. I would be surprised. And I think one of the things that we've been avoiding in the course of our conversations, or we've been promising that we would get to, is the ways in which, one of the things that occurs to me in all of this is the ways in which education is denigrated, and the ways in which writing is under attack. And book bans and denunciations of writers, and so the dignity of the teacher and the classroom space and public education. The story, in its quiet, effective way, touches on and brings to mind our current world, our current environment. So yeah, I think very strong.
Well, I, as you guys know, I retired 3 years ahead of schedule. I say that I retired in a huff, but I was having to get a new doctor about the same time that I retired. Just kind of coincidence. My previous doctor left the practice, et cetera, et cetera. And so the clinic where I would go to see my doctor, they have you fill out this questionnaire before every appointment, and a lot of it is about mental health stuff. And one of the questions is something like, has anyone spoken down to you recently or something? And I mark, yeah, and so, so when I was, being introduced, my first appointment with this new doctor, she was reading through it and she looked at it and she goes, someone's talked down to you recently? And I said, yeah, I'm a school teacher. It happens all the time. And I wasn't being flippant.
Yeah.
It was just, and my wife, who's also retired in a huff from teaching. I mean, she was the same way. It's like, well, yeah, duh. Of course, people are talking down to you all the time as a school teacher, and it's not something that I think a lot of people in other professions, maybe, I don't know, maybe minimum wage fast food workers or something, maybe they get that regularly, but you wouldn't think someone with, I don't know, a PhD in his subject matter, would be talked down to on a regular basis, but it sure was the case. Yeah. So.
Yeah, one of the things I was going to phrase too, which we haven't talked about, is the journal itself for publishing a story like this. I'm not meaning politically or anything like that. What I'm getting at is I've had stories rejected from journals that are set in academic settings because I'm a professor. And so I've written, and I've had editors tell me that they're not interested in publishing stories set in academia because they're an academic journal. I'm like, what the fuck? I mean, if I were a cop, I can't write a cop story. If I were a lawyer, I can't write a lawyer story. If I were a bus driver, I can't write a bus driver. This is the most ridiculous thing I've heard. This is my world. I mean, so I kudos to the press for publishing this work. I know that's just a little shout out, but these are our experiences, and some of us want to share those with our readership. That should be allowed. And even though I'm an academic professor, there are so many ways. I mean, I don't talk to parents about my students. That they're all adults. I've had them call me on occasion asking about grades, and I'm no, that's a privacy thing, and I'm not going to share any of that with you. But I've definitely had the experiences that are in this story, and they ring so true. I'm every semester there's usually a student that covertly I feel is not enjoying the class and bringing about a certain mood, and you got to check the ego aside, and the kinds of things like Brady was saying, and like you were saying, Ted, the student in other situations would probably be the perfect student, for you. So yeah, I just admire that about what's the name of this thing? Bennington Review. Way to go.
Yeah. Well, yes, I echo everything. The only thing I do have an issue with, and it's an interesting question. I wanted to bring it up before we hit pause or hit stop record. Like I said, the contributors' notes are not in the back of the journal. There's this QR code, and so you've got to go. And I hate that. I feel like the contributors' notes ought to be in the journal itself. I mean, I collect old journals, and I love, reading stuff and then going to the back and seeing what, I love reading the contributors' notes from 1966, and then knowing, it might be like some famous poet's first publication, and then, it's like being a traveler from the future, what's going to happen. I don't know. I just love it. Now, clearly, I'm assuming, maybe it's not clear, but I'm assuming that they got into this conundrum where, we can either, I mean, it's a 300 and some page journal. I mean, it is huge. So if they ran the contributors notes, I mean, it would take up several pages. So it's like, well, do we include another short story or a few more poems, or do we include the contributors notes? And I get it. That's a tough call. I understand why you would say, you know what, I'd rather have another story or two or another dozen poems or whatever it might be published, and then they can go online if they really want to. But I really question that. I like the idea of having contributors notes. And Grant, I think you kind of reacted negatively there when I said that. What are your thoughts on that? Especially
You hit it on the head. I know as when I first started editing North American Review, Rob Lee Wilson was, had been the previous editor, and he did not publish contributors notes. And that was something Vince and I decide we wanted to do, so people could track down agents if they read it, can find out where you're at, and like you said, time capsule stuff. Like, I mean, I didn't know this, but we found papers in a desk. We published like one of the first stories by the guy that wrote Greasy Lake, Boyle, and we published one of the first stories by Stephen Dixon, and we published a Margaret Atwood story in the late 60s. And so it would be super cool to have those bios, like when people are looking like, oh, this is Stephen Dixon's second story or whatever, or Peter, not Peter Boyle. That's the guy that played Young Frankenstein.
T.C. Boyle?
T.C., thank you. T.C. Boyle. I'm totally, like, I want the bios there, but that's the debate, right? It's like, this is going to take up so many pages. We can get another story in there. And that's the argument I've heard is we want to publish writers, not their bios. We want more writers, the better. And I get it, but I'm on the side of, I like seeing the bios in the journal.
Yeah. Brady, your thoughts on?
I'm just going to say, the long story short, we changed that process, Vince and I, and started putting bios in the magazine, and we still do that today.
Yeah, no, I like it, and I'm surprised, given the vastness, the immensity of that publication, Ted, as you're holding it in front of us. It seems like they could have found a few more pages for the bios. Just as a pet peeve thing, I don't like cute bios. People talk about their cats or they're being jokey. Like, that stuff just makes my teeth hurt, I'm not a good person, because sometimes if I'm reading the bio page before I dive into the journal issue, there are things that I'll avoid. Like, if their bio sets me off, then yeah. My advice to folks is keep it straightforward. Don't be cute. It doesn't work for me anyway.
Well, I teach this undergraduate class, and they develop websites and online, presences and stuff. And part of that is writing a bio, and apparently they do it in some other class that I don't teach. And so a lot of them bring that bio, and it's so narcissistic. It's about, this bio they've written about themselves, about what a wonderful writer they are, and how they're going to change the landscape of blah, 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 blah. And it's like, okay, no, imagine that you're on a first date with somebody you've met through a dating app, and they spend the first 20 minutes talking about how wonderful they are. How would you react to that? I mean, I think you'd excuse yourself to the restroom and then slip out the back of the restaurant or something. And that's how people would react to, I said, hopefully eventually reviewers, other authors, people will be saying really nice things about you and your work, and feel free to quote that and attribute it on your webpage or whatever it might be. But right now, and also I used to write longer bios when I would send stuff in, but I've definitely, in my experienced age at this point, I like the sort of New Yorker style 1, 2, 3 sentence bio. One of my MFA students just last week has written this wonderful project for their thesis, and they're going to submit to a contest, and that's fantastic. They wanted me to look over their bio because the contest wanted them to send a bio. And it's like this. It's like the beginning of this is your life. That old television. It's like, okay, some wonderful things, and I applaud it, but let's cut it down to maybe a half or even a third of this. And so, and of course, Grant, I think because North American Review is a print journal, I think you guys tend to have briefer bios.
Yeah.
Do you ever have to sort of cut them down? Do people send in,
Yes.
500-word bios, and then you?
Yes, some of the more famous writers, and we make choices, like for example, and Grant's work has appeared in Passages North, Ascent, and elsewhere. No, we would just say Grant's work has appeared in Passages North and Ascent. I mean, it's assumed most of these writers have appeared elsewhere. So like there's little words like that we'll cut. Or, do we really need to mention, the 30 journals you've published in? No, I don't think so. But you have to know what the important ones are. And we'll go back and forth with the writers on that. The one thing I don't like cute. I'm totally with Brady and John Cassavetes. Don't give me cute, as a director. I hate cute. But I do like an offbeat detail. Like, Brady working on a killing floor. That's a good one, brother. So like that's the kind of thing that would leap out at me, and I'd like a detail like that. Or I was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. Oh, awesome. So there are like little details like that I enjoy, but I don't want to hear about you live inside with your 3 cats and your Ouija board. I don't care. So anyway, those are my thoughts. So keep it brief, but a little detail about yourself that's offbeat can be really cool. Or saying, let's say you published a hockey story, Brady, and you say you play in a beer league every Saturday or Sunday, whatever. I'm like, that's okay with that. Like to me, that's cool. It authenticates the work, So
Right. Yeah, and to be clear for you guys, on your about the author page in your book, those are pretty fulsome, and I think that's fine. But on the book jacket or on the paperback on the back of the book, we obviously cut it down to a more bite-sized version of your bio. But yeah, so that would be my advice to any folks out there. I think there's this sense of that a story will get accepted based on the quality of the bio. Like the editors will read, like, oh, this is a really talented writer, so I'm going to publish their story. But every journal I've ever been involved in, including 12 Winters Journal, the kind of rule of thumb is don't read the bio before you read the story or the poem or whatever,
Yes.
So it's an after thing. It's not a before thing.
Yeah, I never read cover letters until sometimes never. I mean, I'll recognize a name, right? But a lot of times I don't know. I want to read it like those old I.A. Richards and those cats, who I think it was I.A. Richards. They took famous poems and took the names off them, and it was amazing the kinds of stuff people would critique, because they were no longer caught up in biographical legend. So I never read the cover letter, and I will go the cover letter if I get done with a story, and I'm like, am I missing the boat here? There's something about this that's telling me it's really good, and I need to read it again. I shouldn't reject it outright. Then I'll go to the cover letter and see, they've been in this one. Wow. Okay, I will reread this story. And that doesn't mean I'm going to take it, but there's some instinctual feel I get that, we were talking at the beginning of the pot, like I like more traditional stuff. You guys are more experimental, and maybe it's a more experimental piece. And I'm like, there's something going on here that's really important. I think I'm missing the boat on this one. The language is fantastic. And then I'll go look at the bio and I'm like, okay, let's read it again, Grant. So that's how I use the bio, but I never, no, I do not. When I go to Submittable, I just click on the story and it pops up. The bio is a separate thing in the cover. I never read those unless I'm enchanted or questioning myself and thinking maybe there's something here that I'm missing. And often there is, just got to be honest, so anyway.
Yeah. Brady, your thoughts on all that?
Oh yeah, no, whether I'm reading, for 12 Winters or reading for a scholarly press or a scholarly journal, I don't even want to know the name. And I certainly don't want to know the bio. I don't want to know about the 42 books they published. I want to read as Grant says, I want to read the thing first and fresh with no or as few preconceptions as possible, and just have that response, try to have an honest, open response, knowing, as we've talked in previous podcasts, about the amount of attention, the level of attention we can bring, after having worked 42 hours in the last 3 days and all that stuff. But I don't, the bio, when somebody's submitting something, the bio and the name don't matter to me. I want the thing.
Yeah.
We need to wrap this up, I'm sure, but one of my favorite stories from academia, as you know, when an article is peer reviewed, of course, the author's name is not associated with it, and so the peer reviewers don't know who wrote it. And I remember reading something. Peter Elbow was one of the pioneers of Rhett and Comp, and wrote books and just countless articles. He said once that towards the end of his career, he had a heck of a time getting anything published because peer reviewers kept saying, "Oh, this sounds way too much like Peter Elbow." And so, so anyway,
in academic submissions, people will, rightly or wrongly, they'll refer to their own work. So even if you don't look at the bio or the name, they're still winking at you from the footnotes.
the insightful study of such and such conducted.
Yeah. In my book entitled such, I know who you are. Yeah.
All right. Well, guys, I'm gonna wrap it up here, just for the sake of our listeners and viewers, if for no other reason. So hopefully, a month from now, I'll be holding up physical copies of your books. That is my goal. Get those out in the world in 2025. So I appreciate your guys' time today. I'll just open it up for any final thoughts and comments before I hit stop record. Grant, back to you for any final thoughts.
No, I guess my final thought would be John Updike said this, and he edited a collection of stories, but greatest American stories of the 20th century with Catherine Kennison. And there was a story in their collection about plums. I can't remember the title of it, but it was written like in 1915. And he said there's places in this world for old-fashioned, simply constructed stories. And I'm not using simply in a pejorative sense here. I like simple. I mean, I like punk rock. I like 3-chord songs and the truth. And there's something about, even with all the elegance of language to this story, that it has a certain simplicity to its structure, taking place in an hour. And I just want to encourage folks out there that there's still spaces for that kind of storytelling.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, Brady?
Yeah, well, I'll turn and go in a different direction. It doesn't matter how many stories you've published or articles or books. When a book is getting down to the last stages and it's getting ready to land in the world, that's a pretty good feeling. I never got tired of that one.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks, guys, and thanks, listeners and viewers. And I'll be in touch with you guys, obviously, as we finish these processes, and we will see everyone else in about a month or so.